Hello again, and welcome back to AdamsFam Anime. I am John, and today I'm going to be reviewing One Piece chapter 1025, titled Twin Dragons. Now, with this chapter, we start off with a request cover page of an octopus compiling Usopp's adventures into a book. And this one is actually a pretty interesting cover page, as in Usopp's outfit is actually pretty nice, and then on top of that, his Jolly Roger is pretty dope as well. Now, I've mentioned before that I am getting kind of tired of these cover pages, but I will say good ones like this are keeping me from getting completely burnt out on the matter. Alright, now amazing cover page aside, we do start off the chapter with Luffy and Momonosuke, and we see that even though Momonosuke has been physically matured, he's still very much the same kid on the inside. And we know this because despite the levity of the situation and the fact that he's been matured, he's still very much afraid of heights. Although we see that he begins to build up some courage with a little bit of prodding from Luffy. But before we get to see Momonosuke take flight, we go back to the rooftop where we see Kaido and Yamato's fight continue. And we see that Yamato's mythical zone is not just for show, as it seems to have some very unique defensive capabilities. In particular, a named technique called Mirror Mountain, where it seems like in order to defend herself from Kaido's attack, she created a layer of skin to protect herself and then shed it after absorbing the attack. And then immediately after that, she follows up with a move called Hollowed Glacier Slash. And this is a physical attack that basically manages to put Kaido on the ground. I mean, the cool looking attack aside, I think there is something that we need to discuss about her potential for ice techniques. I'm not sure if this is something that's specific to Yamato or if this is something that's specific to the Ino fruit that she consumed. Now, whether it's the devil fruit or her own natural ability, I think it's a pretty nice touch for a character like Yamato. And hey, if she does become a Straw Hat, then I think that'll also set up for a very unique combination move between her and Brook. Now, the chapter continues from this point forward with a little bit of dialogue between Yamato and Kaido, and I think this dialogue is a little interesting and also potentially a little bit telling. We do see that some samurai was executed just for feeding Yamato. Now, whether or not that's Ushimaru, we don't know, we don't get the reveal, but we do see that Kaido has a lot of apprehension when it comes to the whole concept of being an ogre and seeing how the humans would treat people based on their ogre blood. Now, I can't help but feel that this could be a setup for Kaido's backstory. I mean, it's really starting to increase the likelihood that he may have faced some form of racial disparity in terms of being an ogre. We also see from a line from him saying that Yamato is the child of ogres, that it would pretty much confirm that her mother was also an ogre. Anyway, with that seemingly relevant dialogue, it's possible that Oda is setting us up for another flashback a little bit further into the past for Kaido and his reasonings for who he is and why he does what he does. So, dialogue aside, it comes to a conclusion with Kaido knocking Yamato to the ground with a club to the head, and then it also appears that he knocks her out of her Zoan form with another club while she's on the ground, this one with Conqueror's Haki. And we leave that fight for a little bit to go check back in with Luffy and Momo, who are now flying. Now, Oda, being true to his One Piece format, what otherwise could have been a very badass moment is undercut by comedy. We see that Momonosuke still has his eyes closed because he is not shaken his fear of heights. So apparently the only way that he can fly as a dragon is by having his eyes closed. Now, this kind of serves dual purposes in this chapter, one for the sense of comedy, and two for the sense of exposition. And I say exposition because Momonosuke, who has his eyes closed, crashes into the live floor, where he reveals himself and Luffy to just about everyone who's involved in the raid. So this means now that King, Queen, Sanji, Zoro, everyone on their floor, and also Big Mom, Law, and Kid, everyone is now aware that there's a second dragon flying around. And it would seem that they're going to be left in the dark for the most part. Now, with the exception of the Straw Hats, I think it's fair to say that just about everyone's going to be questioning who the second dragon is and why Luffy is riding it. And it also seems that some of the Beast Pirate lackeys are assuming that Kaido is rampaging through the castle. So this could also serve as a potential excuse or reason for the numbers to fluctuate even more to the benefit of the rebellion. But moving along with the chapter, we see that Momonosuke's rampage ends with him busting through a wall, and when he does, he appears to come upwards to the roof where Kaido and Yamato are fighting. And despite Yamato being knocked out of her Zoan form, she's still down to fight. So Momo appears as she's charging up her Kannon bow with Conqueror's Haki, and charging up a move called Divine Swiftness White Serpent. And Kaido's distracted, as at the same time she's charging up that move, Luffy is transforming into Gear Force Snake Man, And those two panels aside, this page is actually quite amazing, as you see a lot of depth and a lot of character work for all 4 people on the rooftop. We see that Momonosuke is still apprehensive and scared about his heights and that he wants to get to the ground. But despite the fear that he's shown pretty much all chapter, we see that when Luffy points out where Kaido is, there is a slight look of determination on his face. Even though he's in dragon form, it's quite easy to tell. So despite that page having few words and being so rich in story, the following page is rich in action, as we get a combined move with Luffy's Jet Culverin and Yamato's White Serpent. And then after some fun dialogue between Yamato and Luffy, we get an amazing panel with both dragons facing off with one another and Luffy standing on top of Momonosuke's back. And naturally, Kaido in his dragon form questions as to who this dragon is and demands the name to be given. And we see that Momonosuke is getting a little bit of backbone, because despite the initial hesitance to answer Kaido, he does confidently state that his name is Kozuki Momonosuke and that he's the man who will be the Shogun of Wano, which was actually preceded by Luffy and his typical declaration of him being destined to be the King of Pirates. And of course, in true form to Kaido, he revs up the hype by stating that the world only needs one dragon. And of course, that would conclude the chapter. Now, as per usual with my One Piece reviews, I'm going to rate the artwork, the story, and the hype. Now, in regards to this week's chapter and its artwork, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 9. Now, despite there being a few panels here and there that were from zoomed out perspectives, ultimately this chapter was well drawn, beautifully drawn, and there was some incredible artwork within the panels, specifically the ones that involve Momonosuke and Kaido. And I'd have to say that this panel here with Luffy, Kaido, and Momonosuke has to be one of my favorite panels in Wano thus far. I mean, if you take a good look at it, the work and the detail, the hardness of the lines, the contrasting of the blacks and whites, it's just, for a manga, it's amazing, an amazing panel. So in terms of artwork, as I said before, there's a few gripes, a few complaints about the zoomed out panels, but for the most part, it's one of my favorite chapters in Wano in terms of artwork so far. Now, moving on to the story, I'm going to go ahead and give that a 10. Because despite the fact that we don't really stick to one spot for terribly long and we really just kind of get a little bit of dialogue and not necessarily story development, the dialogue that is included is incredibly relevant to the characters and what we might see from them going forward. Not to mention, I'm actually quite surprised that Oda wanted to get Luffy and Momonosuke up there to that rooftop so fast. I figured we'd probably bounce around, maybe check back in with the other fights, but he managed to keep this all condensed to the rooftop despite the fact that Momo and Luffy spent majority of the chapter transporting themselves from the Tokage port all the way up to the rooftop. I mean, normally I would complain about getting an entire page or even a page or 2 pages full of reaction shots to the whole Pink Dragon and Luffy thing, but I think it will serve as an important narrative going forward when it comes to the rebellion. So it actually kind of fits in with the events of the chapter. So I think everything was beautifully threaded together, well paced, well timed. I think we left the Kaido fight at perfect moments and we rejoined the Kaido fight at perfect moments. So despite the fact that we really didn't learn a whole lot of anything in this chapter, the story was just well done, well put together, and well paced. I mean, there's not much at all that I would change about this chapter. So with that being said, I think 10 has been well earned this week from Oda, and I am incredibly excited to see if he manages to keep up that pacing for next week as well. So finally, moving on to the hype of this week's chapter, I'm going to give that a 9. It's not the most hyped chapter. I mean, we do see a lot of cool stuff. We get to see some named moves from Yamato. We get to see some Conqueror's Haki. We get to see Momo in his dragon form. We get to check in with the other Straw Hats. It wasn't like any real wow factor. Nothing was definite or concluded. I mean, the fight between Yamato and Kaido was amazing, well drawn, well done, and I think it'll translate to an amazing fight once we get to this point in the anime. But I can't help but feel like the comedy moments with Momonosuke kind of undercut the hype of what's going on with the rooftop and also with Big Mom and her fight with Kid and Law. So ultimately, it wasn't the most hype chapter, but still pretty amazing and in line with the fire that Oda's been putting out on these week-to-week chapters. So in terms of hype, easily a 9. Anyways, with the art, story, and hype ratings combined, we get an average or an overall rating for this week's chapter as a 9.3. I mean, it's a fantastic chapter with a perfect story. We even got a little bit of comedy and even some really hype moments, such as the combination attack between Yamato and Luffy. We also get to see that Momonosuke is putting on a little bit of determination, and we also got Luffy in Gear 4th, and Snake Man in particular. So I'm fairly excited to see where this is leading to, and from what I can tell, we don't have a break next week. But I gotta imagine that this upcoming chapter is probably gonna be going away from the rooftop and concluding some of the other fights that are going on, or maybe even checking up with some characters who we don't really have updates on, like Denjiro and the remainder of the Straw Hats, who appear to be well on the way to meeting up with each other, which is a usual indicator in One Piece that the final conflict is about to take place. Anyways, that concludes my ratings portion of my review for chapter 1025 of One Piece. And now for a little discussion. Now, one thing that I want to address from this week's chapter is Kaido's dialogue with Yamato and the emotion that was shown when he was speaking about her fate as an ogre or the ogre princess. Now, I could be reading into this a little bit, but to me it would seem that that kind of implies that Kaido at some point was subject to being treated unfairly or being isolated due to fear of him being an ogre. Now, in the world of One Piece, there are a lot of out there races. We got fishmen, we got Tontada, we got sky people, but the one race that I think that needs to be addressed, or at least have the backstory filled in, is the ogre race. I mean, when we first got introduced to Oars, or the body of Oars, it was like, what the heck? And then we get Oars Jr., who also is gargantuan, but they don't really seem to kind of fit in with the Giants or any other race in particular. So I feel like their backstory might actually be a little bit more important or relevant to the overall One Piece story, seeing as how they're so few in number now. And usually with most villains in One Piece, we get a little bit of tragedy mixed into their backstories. I mean, we don't really get any characters who are just straight up evil. And I'd assume that most of us have gotten a little bit of a feel for a personality that's been kind of shining through Kaido since this whole Wano arc started. And another thing that I wanted to point out about this chapter is Momonosuke's character growth and how fast it seems to kind of just be working itself out. Like in the beginning of the chapter, he was stuttering and, you know, he had his eyes closed during the time he was flying. But by the end of the chapter, you get a little more sense of determination about defying Kaido and taking his place back as the Shogun of Wano. So I'm incredibly interested to see what kind of role he's going to play while being present on the rooftop. Now, it's entirely possible that Luffy might send him away, but I feel like he's at least going to hang around for a good portion of this fight, if not directly get involved himself. Also, Yamato seems to be pretty worn out, so I think it's fair to say or to assume that Yamato will be maybe going down to the live floor or possibly taking a rest break. This might even present itself as the opportunity for Yamato to go meet up with the rest of the Straw Hat Pirates and to possibly build some chemistry or even some backstory when she meets Zoro and the rest of them. Either way, it seems like this is still far away from the conclusion of the Wano arc, or at least the Luffy and Kaido fight. There's still a lot of things that need to be addressed, like the remainder of the Big Mom Pirates. There are still a number of fights that have yet to be concluded. We still have, I think, some backstory that needs to be addressed when it comes to certain characters. We still need to know what's going on with the remainder of the Scabbards who aren't fighting. I mean, there's still plenty to look forward to. Anyways, that's going to conclude my reviews and rating for chapter 1025 of One Piece. Anyways, this has been John from AdamsFam Anime. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to see more content like this, let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next video.